afternoon session.
Great. This is a fairly these are a bunch of thoughts that I'm starting to put together. So hopefully I'll make an effort to sort of pause at parts for us to talk. I want to just sort of tell you as I'm doing it, it's meant really just to be hopefully just a sharing of some facts and some speculation, and then kind of like some rambling. So that's sort of what I'm thinking. So today we're going to talk about mental health struggles among Ph.D. students, possible patterns of what might be the sources, patterns in data that might suggest mechanisms about why the mental health struggles are as high as they are. And then kind of like if I were a life coach, thoughts about my thinking about this that I would say to graduate students. Okay, so this is a poem by Stevie Smith, a British poet called Not Waving But Drowning. Nobody heard him, the dead man, but still he lay moaning. I was much further out than you thought, and not waving but drowning. Poor chap, he always loved larking, and now he's dead. It must have been too cold for him, his heart gave way, they said. Oh no, 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 it was too cold always. Still the dead one lay moaning. I was much too far out all my life, and not waving but drowning. Great poem. It's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite poems. I love a lot about it. I love there's a lot of strange things happening in it. So I can't figure out if this man is dead or alive. So he says he's dead, but poor chap, he always loved larking, and now he's dead. But then at the top, he's still moaning. So it's not clear that he's dead yet. A lot of it, actually, though, that might be sort of that might actually be the clue to the poem. There's two people in the poem. There's at least two people. There's the person that's waving, and there's the people witnessing the waving. And so the experience, what's interesting about the poem to me is it kind of illustrates this problem of it's like asymmetric information that you have with regards to suffering. So people can be right in front of you undergoing considerable distress, and they send signals to it and send signals out about the situation that they're in, and it just isn't deciphered correctly. And I'm not positive that they're not trying hard enough, and I'm not positive that the person observing is not trying hard enough. You know, in economics, there's a model called signaling. And signaling signaling is where there's a sender and there's a receiver. And when person first learns about signaling, people think when they first hear about signaling, they think, oh, what signaling is it's about a person trying to communicate to someone else. But that's actually not what signaling is. That is what signaling is, but signaling is about a situation where you're observing a person and you can't tell the type of that person by looking at them. You don't know if they are the person that is in distress, and you don't know if it's or you don't know if it's just a person that's larking. They both act the exact same. And what is supposed to happen is sometimes you can just communicate your type. You can say, I'm having a difficult time. But the problem is that message could be sent by both types, and the observer still can't really discern it. So what sometimes we look for in signals is, well, what's something that a person who's really struggling would do that the other person who's not struggling wouldn't do? And it's like you'll have these wonderful stories in the social sciences. So it'll be like a female peacock will be wanting to choose a mate. She sees a male peacock and he has a giant plume of feathers. She can deduce his type when she sees the feathers, because she knows if he was not a strong peacock that he would probably be dead, because people that are weak get eaten. So the only one who would have such a long feathers is a strong peacock. And so there's these like stories that you tell where the costly signal that's sent out, the person can observe the signal, see that it's the kind of thing that only the person in distress would send, and then go help them. But actually, part of the signaling literature talks about situations where those signals don't exist. There just doesn't exist a signal that's cost discriminating that only the distressing one can send. And so the poem, what's interesting to me is this person really was doing everything right. They were communicating that they were in jeopardy, and the observer, there's nothing in the poem that suggests that the observer was a callous person. They just don't, it's just a tragedy. They just don't see what is going on. So with that kind of in mind, I wanted to talk about some increasing facts that are known about the experience of graduate students. And I'm going to talk about two papers, one paper by me and one paper in detail by that came out this year about the experiences of econ PhD students. And I'll talk about how generalizable is it, and you can tell me whether some of this feels like things that you've witnessed. But this is a poster that I found in reference to a study at Berkeley. Study by UC Berkeley found nearly half of post-grad students met criteria to classify them as depressed. And so the types of things that they listed that appeared to be the risk factors associated with this was a feeling of being an imposter syndrome. This was people experiencing failure for the first time in their life. Maybe if you think about what the pool of people in PhD programs, it's from the right tail of the distribution. These are very talented people. They've been the most talented people in their life up to that point, and many of them are experiencing failure for the very, very first time, right? At an age where they're not sure what information to draw from the experience. They're having trouble maintaining work-life balance. They're having very difficult relationships with supervisors and other students. They're transitioning from coursework to unstructured creative research work. Especially in the social sciences, that's not kind of lab oriented, where it's really all on you to create all of this yourself. This can be a liberating experience for a student, and it can be soul crushing. There can be financial problems. There can be, depending on the department, an unbelievable feeling of competitiveness, especially right now with COVID and how it affected the job market. Research output, being alone. There's all these things that seem to be associated with this mental health. I wouldn't say crisis, but a realization that many people are struggling. And so the psychiatry literature has already established that undergraduates have a high amount of emotional distress. That appears to have been a regularity that's kind of known for a long time. But it appears, from what I've been able to gather, that the literature on the graduate student experience is emerging. And that one, I think, is just, these are sort of new facts that weren't well known before. And the kinds of particular struggles I just said. So if you remember yesterday, I gave that graph or that slide, and I said, I was talking about parallel trends and I was talking about randomization. And I was saying that, if you imagined a person, I was talking about why associations can or cannot be considered causal. And so I said, the things that stop it from being causal is when an individual chooses an action, chooses a treatment, either because, and I gave this example of the PhD student in happiness, and I said, there's two things that can create bias in an association. One is people choose to go to PhD programs because they are unhappy. That means that unhappy at baseline, meaning if their happiness level, Y0, and happiness, I'm being here very crude. I mean, we're talking about overall mental well-being, okay? So if you believe that a group of people sort into PhD programs who, in a world where they are not in a PhD program, their overall well-being, their overall sense of subjective well-being is lower than other people, then that will create correlations that are not causal, okay? Nothing wrong with it. It's just that the associations get contaminated with selection bias if the group of people in the treatment have different values of Y0 than the people that are not in the treatment. Or if people go into PhD programs because they think that the PhD program will make them happier, and the people that didn't go into the PhD program don't think that way, that'll also create bias when you're looking at correlations. So why do I say this? I say this because I think it is very tempting, as I go through all these facts, to immediately start assigning causality to very, very specific attributes. And I just want to pause this, and I just want to say this is descriptive work about which we know very little. Okay? About which we know very little, because the number of studies that have tried to identify the causal effect of any one of these attributes on the overall subjective well-being of a PhD student is zero. All right? So we don't have counterfactuals for a PhD student that is suffering, because the counterfactual would be their well-being if they weren't in the PhD program. That's one extreme version, or in a slightly different PhD program, right? So we don't know those things. So this talk today is meant to instead establish what might be credible facts, and then using a survey, talk about what appear to be plausible hypothetical mechanisms from which we might do some reasoning to think about what policies to target, at least to better understand what this is going on, okay? Okay, so the baseline that I'm going to be using for some of the comparisons are very, very simple. It's going to be national averages of adults aged 19 to 29. So that's what I'm going to be doing, because that's the age group for these PhD students, and we're going to just compare them with 19 to 29-year-old not general population, right? Okay, but we're going to know that simply comparing two groups of people like that when they're not randomized into PhD programs will not reveal a causal effect of the PhD program, right? It just is helpful to help us realize the levels of the mental health struggles. All right, so this is a paper that I published last year in one of these Nature journals, and I can't remember the name of it, but it wasn't Nature. It was like one of the billion other ones. And it was a meta-analysis of 16 studies published on mental health of all PhD students, not just econ. And here's sort of what we found. On average, 24%. This was tens of thousands of students that were in these studies, the total sample size pooled together. 24% of all PhD students suffer from clinically significant symptoms of depression. That's from in the 16 studies, they had measures of depression from the PHQ-9, and we are taking averages over all these studies. So on average, 24% meet clinical criteria for depression, and 17% meet clinical criteria for anxiety. All right, how bad is that? Major depressive disorder is between 13 and 15% in the United States. Generalized anxiety disorder for young adults same age is 4%. So it appears to be substantially higher than you would expect for the random draw from the population. So now I want to talk about this really interesting new paper by Bolotny et al. In the Journal of Economic Literature. Journal of Economic Literature is a survey journal in the the economics profession, and this paper was sort of the PI of it was a Harvard Ph.D. student in econ / MD student. So he was doing his joint MD Ph.D. in psychiatry. So this was a survey of 513 PhD students in econ at top 8 programs. So that's sort of some things I'll sort of talk about this in just a second, but that's something for us to bracket here, is just keep in mind the generalizability of this. It might be fully generalizable. It might be worse outside of top 8 econ. It might be better out of top 8 econ. It might be worse or better out of top 8 econ into adjacent non-econ fields. So something for you just to keep in mind what we can really learn here. I think I'm sort of kind of leaning on the plausibility that it's probably a little bit more predictive just based off of this meta-analysis, okay? Students were asked about their mental health, their relationships and their social interactions, their PhD experience, and then also interviews with their advisor. So it's a really interesting survey. So PhD students in this survey are not diagnosed. The diagnosis elements of any kind of evaluation of a person's mental health is extremely extensive, so they don't do that. Instead, they collect information on symptoms using 2 main widely accepted survey instruments: the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, PHQ-9 for depression symptoms, and General Anxiety Disorder 7, GAD for anxiety symptoms. There's also some interesting questions about suicidal ideation and loneliness. Okay, so those are sort of the 4 things that they look at. And there's biases associated with the survey. Okay, there was a 45% non-response bias. So they sent out 1,000 surveys, and they got roughly 1,000. They got 500 and something back. So they have a 45% non-response. So what they do in it, and I'm not going to get into this, but what they do in it is they do something called a bounding exercise, where they basically assume the worst about the non-responders and they assume the best about the non-responders, and they see how much of a difference would that make in their estimates. And their estimates are still what we're going to find is still pretty severe. So even under the best case scenario that everybody who did not respond had perfect mental health, this is still pretty severe, okay? It's only going to be reflective of economics, technically. The generalizability, if it exists, is only to economics at best, and even then only to top 8 economics programs, which is like Chicago, MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Penn, etc. That said, I hear these kinds of things a lot. Nothing in what I'm going to say even remotely surprised me, so I suspect that this is fairly generalizable. But it's something that you should just kind of, I think it's helpful to be like super scientific when you read this, and not let yourself kind of jump to conclusions about what it all means, because I think it needs more research. I think these need more research. So what did we find? Amongst the top 8 econ PhD programs, depression symptoms were about 3 times higher than the national average. They were 18%. 18% of graduate students experienced moderate or severe depression, very similar to what we found, which was 22%. Mental health care treatment, though, take-up was very low. Of these people, only about 25% get any treatment for their mental health struggles. These are high-ability people. They know about mental health care, and they're not taking it. So it's just something like, check off why that might be happening, okay? And suicidal ideation is 1.5 times higher than survey respondents of young people in the general population. Loneliness. This is an interesting statistic. Loneliness is common among our survey respondents, with the average student finding himself or herself considerably lonelier than the average retired American. Okay? So this is like, someone in their 70s. The mean score on the UCLA 3-item loneliness scale was 5.2 with a standard deviation of 1.8. For a sample of over 2,000 retired Americans in 2002, that score was 3.9 with a standard deviation of 1.3. So they're much lonelier on average at these schools than a retired American who's sort of surrounded by probably a lot of people who have died and his family has gone away. So it's another statistic just to kind of, that's very stark to think about these benchmarks. That 5.2 is apparently sounds like it's pretty high. Okay.
Did you already say if the survey was all before COVID?
It's before COVID. Thank you. It's 2018. It was before COVID. Thank you, Jason. Isolation is also reported. 16% of survey respondents say they regularly experience isolation from others, or at least feel like they do. How high is 16%? Again, benchmark, 11% of Americans feel isolated. So they're more isolated. They feel more isolated than a random American, okay? 17% of the PhD students feel they lacked companionship compared to 13% of Americans overall. So there's depression, there's anxiety. In addition, there's feelings of loneliness, feelings of isolation. Anxiety, very high. 17 to 18% of PhD students in econ suffer from anxiety, from what appears to be clinical levels of anxiety symptoms, compared to 6 to 7% of the population, 4% for GAD. And there's disparities. So females experience it at a higher rate than men. US and international students experience it pretty similarly. Minorities in the sample have lower anxiety, but LGBTQ experience it higher than the entire sample, 22% compared to 17 to 18% for the whole sample. So you're seeing any one of these is a challenge. All of them is a lot to be bearing. And it worsens with years in the program. Prevalence of mental health symptoms climb substantially with years in the program. So depression and anxiety amongst the first-year students is 21%, but amongst the sixth-year students, which is the modal amount of time that you spend in an econ PhD program, is 36.7%. Suicidal ideation in the first years, 8% had experienced any kind of suicidal ideation in the last 2 weeks. For the 6 years, it's 23%. So the longer the time in the program, all right, it's very natural to think there's something causal in here. But just remember, longer time in the program could be caused by more severe mental health struggles itself. You are having struggles and it's causing you to stay there longer, all right? Or both staying there longer and the mental health struggles could itself be caused by the PhD program itself. It could be this trying to figure out why this is happening, okay? It's hard, and we don't have a panel. So this is just 1 year, one cross-section of the data. So we don't know if these 6-year students had experienced, we don't know that it worsened over time. We just know at a snapshot, it's different, okay? Because maybe these people that have lower anxiety and depression left before the 6th year. That would cause the average to go up, right? So we don't really know all that. But there does appear to be at least some suggestive evidence that it's caused by the program, okay? For one, mental illness diagnosis prior to entering the program, there is 9.8% of the 5th year students have a mental illness diagnosis, but then it goes up amongst the 6. So there seems to be like, it's like there appears to be something kind of like, I mean, again, this could be selection, so you don't know it, but it appears that there is, So there's 19.8% of the 5th year and 13% of the 6th year had it prior to the program, but then there's differences of when you get diagnosed during the program, then it does grow with the years. So they have, 10 to 13 are diagnosed before, but then 19 and 29% are getting it during the program. Okay, so there seems to be possibly something is happening in the program resulting in the diagnosis. Of course, maybe they would have always got diagnosed even if they weren't in the program, right? So what could be the mechanisms? So authors collected this really interesting detailed information about social interactions, particularly with faculty, that included interviews with their faculty advisor. And I want to talk about some of the associations and what it might sort of suggest. One of the things that comes up is job dissatisfaction. Yes?
Do you mind talking a little bit about the process for interviews with the faculty advisors? Was it semi-structured interviews? Was it conducted by the authors themselves?
It's conducted by the authors themselves, but they only discuss that's a really good question. They are it's definitely structured because they're reporting, yes, no, and kind of Likert scale kind of answers. So there definitely is that. I can't remember if there's a qualitative piece to it, but I think that there is a qualitative piece to it also. That's a good question. Yes, sir.
Are these interviews with every faculty advisor for all of the 500 something?
It's with the main faculty advisor for these students.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe that's right. No. I can double check that. I actually don't think that's right. I think that it is a mixture of faculty and PhD student, and I don't believe that they've matched them. Okay. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a good question. I did think it was matched, but that now I remember.
And then since they're structured, do you mind giving us an idea, like a flavor of the questions that were asked?
Let's see. I don't have it. Let me see. Let me see if it's in the back here. Okay, so let me see if the actual survey is in here. Here it is. Okay. Over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by any of the problems? Little interest or pleasure in doing things. Feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. Okay, so these are the kinds of questions. So that was the PHQ-9. And then they asked them the GAD-7. Over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by any of the following problems? Feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge, not being able to stop or control worrying, trouble relaxing. So from this, they'll aggregate a score and they'll be able to measure anxiety. Suicidal questions right here. Have you ever thought about it? Or attempted to kill yourself? How often have you thought about it? It's almost kind of has some similarities to this Columbia risk score, but how likely is it? So these are very clear questions about planning and imagining. Self-esteem, list of statements with your general feelings about yourself. On the whole, I am satisfied with myself. I think I am no good at all. I feel that I have a number of good qualities. I feel I do not have much to be proud of. So there's a lot of these questions about self-esteem, imposter phenomenon, eating disorder, adult self-report scale for ADHD, exercise, feeling overwhelmed. What else? Drinking, sleeping, mental health diagnosis and treatment. Then they're asking a lot of questions about how helpful is it to talk with people about mental health? How helpful was the faculty with addressing your mental health issue? How helpful were the mental health professionals outside of your university with addressing your mental health issue? How helpful were families? How helpful were friends? Are you receiving treatment? Personal. It looks like it's mostly structured. I don't know, although there was here a list of verbatims, so there also is going to be a qualitative piece to it. So they must have had some, I don't know if it was a true ethnographic study, but there is some qualitative piece to it. Okay, sure. Okay. So there's statements made that you could classify as people are dissatisfied with their jobs. It's a weird way to talk about it. It's a weird way to kind of talk about like a graduate student having job dissatisfaction because they sort of don't really feel like they have a choice and they're kind of dialed in and ready. But if you look at the statements and you thought of these as workers, you would say these people do not like their jobs. Okay, so unusually high levels of job dissatisfaction when compared to the faculty. So that was kind of an interesting comparison, or the general population. 26% of students report feeling that their work, quote, is always useful, always or most of the time. 70% of faculty say that. 63% of the general population say that. So around a quarter of PhD students in econ feel that the work that they're doing matters or is useful. Belief that their work will have a positive impact on someone else is also very low. 19% of students feel they have opportunities to make so I put this in quote because I thought this was an interesting thing. The 19% of students feel they have opportunities to make a positive impact. It was interesting how it was phrased. 9%, first of all, they feel it, so it may or may not be true. Second of all, they say they have opportunities to make a positive impact, as opposed to the ability to make a positive impact. Okay, so notice is not saying that 19% of students feel that they do not have the ability or the innate skill. They seem to highlight that there's a missing opportunity to have a positive impact outside of their own inner experience. Okay, compared to 58% of faculty and 53% of the working age population, which could all contribute, which then is something that when you take that expression of the job dissatisfaction alongside the social isolation that they feel, these things start to be, they seem like they could be reinforcing of each other. Intensity, though, in correlational analysis, the intensity of that pessimism is predictive of mental health problems. Some of these things are not predictive of mental health problems, which I'm going to say, but this negativity is correlated with the severity of their mental health problems. So it could be, I just kind of sometimes have these little caveats, and at any point, if there's something about a slide that you want to that you have a thought about, we can pause. But one thought I had was a potential program intervention. So as we kind of talk and kind of thinking about the conversation, Ava, that you and I were kind of having earlier. One way I was kind of interpreting our conversation is programs that are a little bit more at scale versus kind of into atomistic types of interventions. And so I was just thinking at either a high or a low scale level of intervention, one thing that might be worth looking into is whether or not presenting opportunities or having successful positive impacts on others is in fact able to make any movement in a person's overall subjective well-being, or is it really just endogenous? Okay. And then this one is the one that seems to be the authors do seem to think that there is a story in here, the faculty-student relationship. Obviously, everybody in the room knows the faculty-student relationship is a crucial relationship with huge costs and huge benefits. These are the individuals that have huge impact on your whole career because they write you letters, right? They collaborate with you, they write you letters, they get you funding. There's all these, you are dependent on them. And so the first thing that is not correlated with your mental health problems in this data set is how many times you meet with the faculty. There doesn't appear to be any relationship with frequency of interacting with the faculty advisor and your overall subjective well-being. So that is one mechanism that probably still needs to be, it's not identified, so this isn't causal, but one thing just to note off the top is that there doesn't appear to be a statistical association between the frequency with which students meet with a faculty and how they are doing, okay? So what is correlated with their mental health? Here's what students express: their ability to be honest with their advisor, feeling that their advisor cares about their research, feels that their advisor cares about them as a person. That last one was pretty heavy, that came up in this. So this is a part that I kind of wanted to sort of bring up as something that I think interventions that are considered should take into consideration what we do and do not know and be very careful, because things could make things worse for well-meaning reasons. But just wanted to point out these power dynamics between the faculty and the student, and not every faculty's judgment in these situations being necessarily correct is something just to kind of keep in mind. Not every faculty might have the best judgment when getting into more intimate relationships with a student. Okay, so that's something to just kind of put out there. Focus, I was thinking, should be given probably to, as we go forward, to designing structured training to faculty about this topic so as to minimize any downside risk that could harm the faculty or the student. Just thinking about how complicated a relationship is with a person that's struggling with a faculty that is probably truly not equipped for any kind of therapeutic type of thing. But just putting that out there. All right. So, but here's the thing that I thought was interesting. In the survey, the students want to talk with the faculty, but not necessarily about mental health. So that was interesting. So the authors write, few students say they want to talk about mental health issues with advisors. That does not appear to be what they're wanting. They know that they can, or, it's not that they're not sure if they can or they can't, but on average, most of them said that was not what they were wanting. So what do they want to talk about? Non-academic career options, preparing for the job market, research progress. It was a lot of professional things related, which I thought was interesting, because if they're wanting to talk about these things and they're feeling isolated, and this is so critical for their livelihood, not having an ability to solve those problems with the advisor or think through these things could be something that is a low-cost way for an advisor to begin to take notice of and begin to talk to them about. But they are unaware how to address concerns about advising. So only 42% of students say they know where to turn for help when advising problems arise. 36% say they are moderately or very likely to do so if they did arise. So contrast that with concerns about mental health. 87% of students say they would know where to turn for help if they faced a mental health problem, and 55% say they would do something about it. So it's kind of interesting to now begin to kind of compare these two stylized facts. They are fully aware of where to go to get help for mental health problems, and more than half say they would go do it. All right? This is the thing, the first two bullets are the things that I thought was interesting, is that they don't know where to go to get help for their advising problems. Because, well, I'll get into more of this. They don't know where to go for their advising problems. And that's not something a therapist can assist with, okay? And even if they do know, around a third would do something about it, right?
Scott, did you interpret the 87%? Well, reading that line and then the prevalence measures of depression and anxiety from the symptom in question.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That is kind of what I was wondering. I was wondering if, I was wondering if they were thinking that their problem was with the advisor and the social interactions or something. Not they think about mental health in a way that doesn't seem to apply to their situation. And so they don't know to recognize that they are depressed or that they have anxiety.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think with that too, a lot of people think that like it's normal in graduate school to
Right.
be like stressed and depressed and anxious, and that's kind of like a culture of like the norm.
Right.
That's just one thing that I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think that absolutely is true.
Archie, you had your hand up first. Go right ahead.
Oh, that was what you were going to say? Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, then my additional point was, because I also had that thought then, was that a lot of the mental health resources that are marketed towards grad students and undergrad students through university programs, at least this is my experience, anyone else is welcome to critique, is often, it's marketed as if you're having a response to immediate mental health crisis. Something like you are having extreme stress about your qualifying exams, you are having some sort of familial issue outside of school, things like that, rather than you might be experiencing a true general anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, which
Right.
is a longer term.
Yes.
It's a little bit harder to interpret what that means, especially when it's normalized in the culture. And then also a lot of the free resources, specifically here at UW, for those like reacting to a specific circumstance are limited to a certain number of therapeutic visits as opposed to a longer term therapy. But when you're talking about a price sensitive population, that's a deterrent.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yes.
I just have one more comment based off of what you just said. So one thing that came up, it was like several slides ago now, was the point that you made about people knowing that, or people feeling like they could, there was a low number of people that feel like they could go seek like help or that they like had the opportunity. And the first thing I was thinking about in terms of like mental health treatment was like insurance status. And
Yeah.
that, like, for graduate students that can be an issue depending on what schools that you're going to and whether or not they have insurance.
Right.
Speaking to the recent point, thinking about my experience here, even we have, I mean, in my opinion, we have like a really good insurance option for students, and like that was part of the reason that I even chose to come to UW in comparison to some of the other schools where you might have to go in the marketplace or do some of these other things because insurance wasn't like included, it was subsidized. But at UW, again, in my own experience, we have pretty good resources, but it is really hard to get those resources unless you have a diagnosis. And so going to, an outside resource in comparison to like what we get at UW, which I think is something like 6 therapy visits or something like that. If you want to go through your own insurance provider, you have to have basically a diagnosis in
Right.
order to get a referral to a therapist, which then you might be on the waiting list for several months. So even if they know who to turn to for help, it could still be this huge long-term barrier to actually getting the treatment that they need. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see that the number is quite high for people knowing
Yeah.
where to turn, but I wonder, once they do have this issue and they do recognize that it is a problem,
Yeah.
how likely they are to be able to actually seek and get the treatment that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I actually add one more point? Because I was also thinking about how good the UW resources are, but again, as you said, there are still barriers. I was thinking about a specific experience here, and this is obviously exclusively anecdotal, but thinking back to this original really low number of the minority population, that they were higher on anxiety and general depressive symptoms. I specifically know like some of the minority students here have very different experiences interacting with the therapist, which like I personally would think has a lot to do with training and resources that goes into therapy in general that like stems from all of these different cultural differences, and like there's a long list of potential explanations. But I think a lot of it is like international students especially, who, as far as I'm aware, in grad programs do tend to make up a larger amount of the minority population, do have very different experiences when seeking services
Yeah.
in Western culture
Mhm.
institutions.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
just a thought on that minority number being so low.
Right.
Being at odds with what we might expect.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Um, mm. Yeah, these supply side constraints about access to healthcare, pricing, and things like that. I definitely, I guess I kind of got the sense a little bit that they were not utilizing even the little bit they had. That was the thing that sort of struck me, was it didn't seem like they were facing the constraint of I only have 6 visits, because I kind of got the sense a little bit, but I don't have the exact number to support this. I got the sense they weren't even doing the first one. It was almost like they were just holding it and not using it for this. They were just kind of like experiencing this negative environment, but not necessarily acting upon it. And I don't know if that's because it's not, the article doesn't really seem to have an answer either. It's just this low demand. So I wanted to kind of offer this part at any point. I just wanted to kind of give you an economist kind of thinking about this, and I struggled to write these slides because I just don't want it to sound like I'm kind of having a platitude, but I don't have a lot of really clear programs to point to. So I just wanted to kind of give you things that I've been thinking about for a long time. So the way that I think about the faculty-student match is I think of it as what's called a marriage market problem. And marriage markets are a way of describing when you have 2 groups of people. Usually it's like a buyer and a seller, or it's a firm and a worker. And what goes on in a marriage market is that everybody on the firm side is actually very unique, lots of different firms. And everybody on the worker side is very unique, lots of different workers. And uniqueness just means, all that uniqueness means is that each individual worker has a preference over which firm they get a job with, and every firm has a preference over which worker they hire. And those actually are kind of complicated types of problems of moving, because that's where things like comparisons matter. It's where things like information matters a lot, because if they're not all perfect substitutes for each other, it really matters. You don't want to get it wrong. And so you have things like search, you have things like the importance of there being enough options that the market thickens, and when the market's thick enough, a lot of these things can work really well. And the thing is about the faculty-student relationship is that even though there's thousands of faculty across the world, there's only dozens in a department. And so in markets, so really the relevant market for the student is like this intensely, almost monopolistic kind of environment where there might only be a few people in your field. There might only be one person in your field. Okay, so this matching that happens in the department probably has a lot of randomness. So you might think that you really want to work with someone. You then begin to work with them. You hate it. You cannot leave, because you believe that you will be retaliated against. You believe that there will be some sort of reputational blowback. There's no way to know ahead of time that this person has something. There's no website, just like there's no website for people to rate their ex-spouses. There's no real website for advisors. There's just stories you just hear. And those stories are reflective of whether or not that particular person had a good experience. You hear a story about a person that had a bad experience on a date, doesn't mean that you'll have a bad experience on a date, because maybe they just weren't the right fit. Everybody kind of knows that. So you always think about these fit things, and you just don't really know. There's not a lot that you can learn about whether you will be successful with this person. Okay, so that's just something to think about. And I know that Texas A&M uses something that Al Roth had developed along with Lloyd Shapley and David Gale called the deferred acceptance algorithm. They use the deferred acceptance algorithm to assign advisees to advisors. Basically, all the first year students rank who they want to be with, all the faculty rank who they want to be with, and then there's an algorithm that just matches. It's the same algorithm that hospitals match with physicians. So maybe that's helpful, maybe it's not helpful, but the thing I thought was interesting is that in absence of it, it's just kind of what in econ they just call the invisible hand. It's just like this, like you're just hoping that through voluntary kind of sorting on a very small community with all of these really unique features, that a person is going to match with a faculty that is optimal in some sense that we don't even really know how to define that. Okay, so the second thing I was going to say is I had heard Dick Thaler say this. Dick Thaler's a behavioral economist, and he had said something interesting the other day on Twitter that I'll probably remember for a long time. He said, the stuff that we do over and over and over, we learn from our mistakes on and we get better, so because you can get this feedback on it. So you kind of do this thing repeatedly and then you become a better driver, okay? The things that we don't do very many times, you don't get a lot of feedback necessary to improve, and those things might not function well. You only have one advisor. You only get one Ph.D. A lot of people, get married once, if at all. And so, you don't have a ton of jobs, right? So that you can learn everything. You don't go up for tenure, but one time. So there's things about this where, there might be reasons to believe that this kind of left to itself might not be optimal, might not kind of just be evolving to be optimal, that there's in a way that other situations could be optimal and be left alone. So there could be a place for us to start thinking about this assignment of the student to the faculty a little bit more. This other thing that I wanted to kind of bring up as we think about policies. So I have this thought that goes through my head, and I think a student is having a very hard time, and a faculty wants to help, and then something inappropriate happens. And that doesn't seem to me like a crazy story that could happen. Something inappropriate happens between the student and the faculty, especially if the faculty is already feeling a lot of feelings for this student, or if the student is feeling a lot of feelings for the faculty such that they would reveal it in the first place. So as I was kind of thinking about it, I just was wondering to myself, what is the right principles for designing interventions, and should they rely on the discretion of the faculty, or should there be rules? So in macroeconomics, it's like an age-old question. Do you have rules for the federal government, the Federal Reserve, or are they going to allow to have discretion? And the worry I have about discretion is that lots of times discretion is where all of the demons kind of come in. That's where biases come in. That's where people treat certain people differently than others. And, so the presence of discretion combined with a lack of guidance as to what the goals are seems to be something that could be really challenging. So I worry a little bit as we learn about this, if we don't get ahead of it and start providing actual training to faculty to sort of show what exactly they should and shouldn't be doing, and making it very clear, it could create lots of risks for both parties. Lots of unnecessary harm happens, and that can have very chilling effects on anybody wanting to help anybody. Okay, so so this issue about student-faculty boundaries, about personal space and intimacy, I think this is something that needs to be kind of thought about and talked about, because the student is experiencing isolation. Their primary relationship is with the faculty, and they struggle to feel that the faculty believes that they're a person. And if the faculty does not know exactly what they can and can't do, and they have a lot of discretion, a lot of harm could be done. That's something I do worry about. So, second thing, I also don't know if faculty have the expertise to tap into their own discretion on this. Faculty in economics programs anyway, on every program, is what you call selection on the dependent variable. The people that are faculty are the people almost that didn't have these issues, because the people that have these issues oftentimes end up having such severe setbacks that they might even leave the program altogether. So you're looking at a group of people that are almost amateurs with respect to this type of problem. And that's another thing for you to be thinking about, which is that if this is the pool of healthcare workers in the graduate programs, which is the faculty, the fact is that job did not select on those skills. And so they might not have, if they are being expected to use their discretion, they very well might not know what to do, even in a good intentioned way, okay? When you add to this that this is the kind of thing that starts to be considered service work, and service work is not rewarded by faculty and is overrepresented amongst females and underrepresented minorities, it's got this pattern of, again, the kinds of people that might end up doing this might get overburdened by it also, okay? So, which is all the more reason I think that solutions into this are probably not going to, it is not going to be sufficient to try to appeal to faculty discretion. It's probably going to require programs, okay? So things that departments can do, I think, are to collect data. And by that, I mean talking to students, listening to students, focus groups with students, guided with safe qualitative researchers, that there's no repercussion of anything that the student says. Nothing is going to be harmed. No one's going to be harmed as a result of it, so that each department can understand what their own problems are, okay? Students also, I think, in the collecting of data, I do think always uniformly everywhere people need their stories to be heard, and they need to feel heard, and they need to feel believed, and they need to feel that their personal truth is being validated. So, simply also just having regular listening conversations with students probably does do a whole lot, just like it does a whole lot in all kind of organizations. My suspicion is that the solutions for addressing this, there'll be partial solutions, but they'll probably have general patterns, and then they'll also be locally idiosyncratic too. And there's probably lots of room for innovation. The issue about creating student success, something that now I'm kind of just beginning to offer just thoughts that I've been having. This selection on the dependent variable, this is, I think, really important. Many faculty come from a period of time where they were successful. They may not know that the reason they were successful was not because of their own attributes. They may not necessarily see that because everybody has this survivor bias. We only, you don't really know there's a lot of luck that ends up with where people end up, and a lot of people have a trouble kind of knowing exactly what part of it they played and what part of it somebody else played. So something to be thinking about is many faculty believe that this really is normal. They just think that this is a normal experience. This kind of hazing that can happen at many graduate programs of it just being pure brutal torture. They don't know that it could be another way, right? So that's one thing for you to be thinking about. Another thing I was going to say, I say successful economists, but it means really everybody. I think that we have to remember that our goal is to create successful scientists. And I think that will require adopting a model and a culture of mutual respect and support. Does not mean withholding criticism. It means holding students to high standards. It means validating them, believing they can meet those standards, and then investing in them, and then expecting them to be successful. You know, that kind of optimism on the part of the faculty, I think, is a cultural attribute that has to be reinforced by culture. Okay, and so now I wanted to tell you the things that I am trying to do on this. So I or things that I'm thinking about, things that I think might be helpful. Let me say it this way. I think that there could be a role for a coach. So there's 2 uncredited jobs among faculty for junior people. There's the mentor, helps you learn the ropes, and there's the sponsor. They fight for you. Given these thin markets, you don't need mentors. Given these thin markets, you have to have sponsors in your department for you to get tenure. You don't need the mentors in your department. Mentors can come from anywhere because mentors are really teaching you about general human capital, and sponsors are literally fighting alongside you in the department. Okay, so the market failures where they exist could very well be in the area of the sponsors, but I also think that there could be a market that needs to emerge for coaches, academic coaches. So I want to tell you I wanted to kind of put this out there. So what exactly do I mean by an academic coach? Recall that some of what was said was about a person's inability to talk to their advisor about work things, not mental health things. And mental health things may be a consequence of these other professional struggles. So one of the things that's grown over the last several years is this thing called the life coach. There's around 20,000 of them nationally. It's very popular among executives. It's a very fast-growing industry, and the Zoom technology has really kind of facilitated it. Extensive scheduling apps, Zoom allows for this greater scale on the supply side, shortages of mental health professionals, the fact that they don't have to meet state board occupational licensing. A lot of therapists will moonlight as a mental health, as a life coach. All of it's contributed to just sort of this growth of the market. It's a lot more flexible. The only thing is, coaching is very specific to an industry for it to work. So like you couldn't go to get a life coach that specializes in lawyers, even though there is such a thing, because all of that life coach's human capital is bound up in servicing the career and the overall experience of a lawyer. They know things about law. They know things about making partner. There isn't one for the graduate student, and there isn't one for the junior faculty. There really isn't one for faculty. So coaching effectiveness is really field specific, and a good coach aimed at executives, they may have like a similar personality, but practically it would have nothing in common with academia. I experienced this all the time when I would work with a therapist while I was going up on tenure. It just felt like they could be so much more helpful if they just knew what a top 5 was. You know, if they just knew what a revise and resubmit was, if they just knew what a prelim was, you know, if they knew what job market meant, if they knew what any of that stuff meant. It just felt like a whole range of things, like, things could be validated and problem solving could occur, but they're not, all right? So the thing about these coaches, the things about these life coaches, it's like a mixture of self-help, skills-based kind of training, but it's focused on professionals. And it clearly has, it's like, because it's skills based, it has a lot of this like positive thinking type of elements to it. But I've seen one thing. So this economist, Miles Kimball, has started pods. These are weekly meetings with 12 people led by a coach, in-depth discussion, mutually supportive, all confidential, all over Zoom. Okay? He does them for free. Is it mentoring? It's not exactly mentoring. Is it something else? How much human capital is required to be an effective coach? I'm not entirely sure. But as I've been doing these workshops, I have realized that, and I've had it articulated, and I'm just sort of being honest, I am positive that there is a non-trivial number of people that are wanting a continuation of the positive advisor relationship. They're wanting a continuation of the positive advisor relationship because they feel very, very alone and trapped in their department. Very, very not really sure. So one of the things that you learn in economics is this thing. I actually think this is really interesting. So in economics, we have this model, the utility model, and then you maximize it, and then you can solve for it. And then one of the things you do is you can say, well, utility is just all it is ranking is your preferences over whether you want to prefer to live in that world than the one that's slightly different. And you can show mathematically, it's really kind of weird. Once you sort of begin with this specific statement about what it means to have utility, and you go through all these steps and you solve it, and then you ask what happens to this person if you give them $1, their utility goes up. Their utility goes up when you give them $1. It says it's non-decreasing, indirect utility is non-decreasing in income. So why do I bring that up? The only reason it matters in these models is not because people care about money, but because in the models, the people buy goods and services with money. It's all about being in a capitalist economy. It's not that the money is itself is useful. It's that the person uses that dollar to go in and do these activities that they actually like. And the reason why I bring this up is because compensation, in these models, compensation will increase your indirect utility, but only if you don't change other stuff. So it's unclear what effect leaving your job will have, because you might leave your job to get more money, but you don't like your new job as much. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, is because I think part of, and I know this might feel a little disruptive for me to be talking about mental health and now be talking about money, but universities are monopsonists. Monopsonists keep wages down. So they're like the opposite of a monopolist who keep prices high. Monopsonists keep wages down. They pay workers lower than they should. And I bring this up because there's a lot of things about the university structure that itself could be kind of suppressing that overall joy, just because we can't easily switch to something that would be better. We can't easily go to another university. We can't easily go to another department. All right? So any of the coaching, I feel like a little weird saying this, but I just wanted to say this. I think that your career is really important for your overall utility. And I think that getting a job that you enjoy is really important for your utility. And finding work that you find meaningful is really important for utility. But compensation is also really important for your utility. And having a job that pays well is really important for your overall well-being. Mathematically, it shows up in that indirect utility bullet I said. And the way that you get in our field higher salary is through publishing in high impact journals. And publishing in high impact journals is going to have a massive return on your lifetime utility. And it can be a slippery slope and cause you to care about things that don't matter. It's this weird paradox of chasing after things, chasing after success that doesn't matter and which does matter at the same time. And so I just kind of wanted to sort of put out here that part of what makes it hard in this job is that money does really matter, publishing does really matter. Doing high impact work does really matter. And it can be soul-sucking at the same time. You can end up with so many bad behaviors, constantly comparing yourself to other people. For a long time, I was horrible at Vita comparisons. I was horrible at Vita comparisons. I would look up on public salary websites and see what other people made, and it was painful. I just was always haunted by wanting. It wasn't really until the last 5 years that I just became really at peace and grateful that, you know, most of my kids are happy and healthy, and that started to kind of restructure what I wanted this career to be about. So this issue around money and happiness, I think it is actually very, very complicated, very, very complicated. And it's to say that it doesn't matter, to say that compensation doesn't matter, I think is a flat out lie, is absolutely incorrect. And to say that it is not filled with trappings is also not true either. So I also wanted to kind of say that too, that these mental health struggles can persist even into your career, even after graduate school. They start taking on different flavors as you get older. So what does it mean to be successful? So there's this great line from the first season of Ted Lasso where Ted Lasso says he's been losing a lot, and he says, I don't really concern myself with wins and losses. There's this quote from John Wooden, who's the winningest coach in UCLA basketball history. And he says, success is a peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. And this quote, I think, is really deep because Wooden is the most winningest coach in UCLA history, and he does not say success is based on winning. And from what I've been able to gather, he actually believed this. So for him, what is success? It is a peace of mind that comes from self-satisfaction. It requires knowing that you did your best. Okay? It requires hard work, practice, training. It requires rest, mentorship, supportive relationships. It requires paying attention. It requires learning from mistakes. Okay? This is a pyramid that he made called the Pyramid of Success. And these are the things that he sees as really key to success on his basketball team. Being industrious, friendship, loyalty, cooperation, being enthusiastic, being intentness, taking initiative, being alert, having self-control, condition, skill, all of these kinds of non-cognitive skills. The thing about this is it's really, I feel like when I begin to talk to people about my own thoughts about mental health, and I feel this kind of schism inside my brain because I am fully aware that being in situations that are beyond your control, particularly ones that cause a lot of trauma in your life, are unfair. And I could tell you stories about my life, and they're absolutely brutal, the things that have happened in our family. But and so fixing the external should always be on society's mind. Should always be on society's mind. The problem is, if I wait for society to fix this problem, it will never get fixed in my life. It will never get fixed in my life. And I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And so the thing is, I think that we can be happier in the midst of truly brutal environments than we know. I've experienced it myself. I believe that it is possible, even as and I think graduate for many people, the graduate program was that time in their life. For many people, it was the best time of their life. For some people, it is a really hard time. For some people, it was their tenure track. For me, it was my tenure track. Graduate school was not bad. Tenure track was brutal. Tenure track was nothing compared though, to the years that followed it. So all of that said, I have become convinced that it is possible to live in the midst of true suffering and find real joy. Okay? So I want to tell you a little bit about the things that I have thought about. I think that you do not compare yourself to others because I do think comparisons are valuable. I do think comparisons are valuable. I do not think comparisons to others are valuable. I think the comparisons are with respect to the correct counterfactuals. And the correct counterfactual is your true self, your best self, not Jason Fletcher, not Christine Durance, right? So what you want to be thinking about, what I want to be thinking about is who am I? What is my production possibility frontier? How do I move to the edge of my production possibility frontier right now? What are the stories that I'm telling myself and what are the stories I'm believing about myself that are really untrue stories? All stories are false, but some are useful. That's a phrase that is worth telling. All models are false, but some are useful. All stories that you tell about the world are false, but some of them are useful. Useful for what? That is the key question. Useful for what? Okay? So you tell certain stories in certain situations that are useful for some goals and not others. So don't fall into this unfair and somewhat toxic trap of defining success based on what you see another person having. And the reason is, if it actually made you happy to do that, I would say to do it. It makes you deathly ill. It makes you deathly ill. It will make you hate the person and it will make you hate yourself. So you cannot fall into this trap, and it is intoxicating to fall into it. And frankly, in my field, economics, our profession provides very little guidance as to what goodness looks like. Okay? So success is not an intraperson comparison, it's intraperson between your current self and your potential self. And success is, about you and not others. So job dissatisfaction, non-academic jobs. Okay? One of the things that struck me in this survey was this thing where the respondents said that they wished that their advisors could help them know about non-academic options. Non-academic options. And what I think is really interesting is that if anybody is going to know about non-academic options, it's a person with a daggum Ph.D. They are extremely intelligent. I think what happens in the graduate program is partly because of the thinness of the market. Your vision about what is the good life and your values get shaped by a small number group of people. Okay? And so, and that may not be you. That may not be you. All right? So the first thing I would just want to say to you is there's this guy, Gary Becker and George Stigler, and they're these incredible economists at Chicago. They both won the Nobel Prize. And they argue that utility or preferences never change over your life. And they argue it for some reason. I want to just put out something. There's a degree to which I completely agree with that, but there's another sense in which I think all of us as adults are having to figure out what our values are. And sometimes you have to do it more than once. Sometimes you have to do it early, and then sometimes you have to reset and do it again in light of new information. So I think that what you've got to do is you've got to start deciding what exactly are your preferences. Deep questions. Why do you want these things? Not in a judgmental way, but what exactly is it that makes you want this particular goal? All right? And now I just want to be real concrete. Just say something really factual, which is that oftentimes in academia, in research-oriented departments, historically it was frowned upon to not go into academia, at least in econ. I didn't quite feel it because I was so obsessed with being an academic. But I will be completely honest, I always thought that it was I failed the job market if I didn't get the tenure track job. I always felt that way. So I was very nervous, very, very anxious. And I just want to put this out here. So one of the things that I've been learning over the last year is that the tech, and probably you guys know this, but I was just so blinded to it for a long time. The The tech industry is gobbling up PhDs of all types. Fourth fastest growing job of last several years, according to LinkedIn, is data science and machine learning engineers. And there really isn't as much of a data science, like a modal track. There's not really a modal track into the data science job. They hire anybody. PhD philosophy, PhD literature, all right? They have the highest compensation packages in the country. Early career salaries reach $200,000 within a few years of graduating. Spoke with a guy the other day, this friend of mine, tenure track professor, hired by a tech firm at the L7 position, $600,000. All remote work, 40 hours a week. I'm not saying you should do it, but what I'm trying to say is, I think that you need to know what your options are and ignore those stories and embrace the stories that are your stories. That if that's who you want to be, that's who you get to be. You get to be whoever you, you get to decide the story that defines who you are, okay? And so just as you're thinking about wanting more to know about other options, the thing I just would say is, just because you think that the faculty advisor wouldn't want it for you, A, you don't know if that's true, okay? Because you probably haven't asked them, or maybe you have, but B, it doesn't matter. Also, it doesn't matter. They don't pay the bills at your house. They don't have to look in your mirror, all right? So it's just something for you to be thinking about. As you're thinking about this job dissatisfaction, be completely open to possibilities. Keep constantly thinking, there is not constraints, there are possibilities. And be open and curious to what they might be, okay? I'm from a lower ranked school. I don't feel like I'm in the club. How can I get ahead? Imposter syndrome is very real. It's just not true. There's a difference between things being real and things being true, okay? Real is anything you feel. Anything you feel happened in history. That was real. That happened. Any negative feelings you had, those were real. If you felt hate, that was real. If you felt love, that was real, okay? A conclusion that you draw about who you are, though, that's a model. And models are not true. Models are never true. They are either useful or they are not useful, but they are never true. And that is their strength. Their strength is that they're not true. Because they're not true, they can abstract away from very specific situations, and you can use those models to kind of navigate a historical life. But you have to navigate them in a way where you know what your goals are. And stories about you are not a good person or you are not fit to be doing these kinds of things, those are just models. They're not true. They have no empirical validity other than that you said them, other than that they were thoughts that went through your head, okay? So if it's not true, then you ignore it. You pay attention to it when it's useful, and you put it aside when it's not useful. And I'll tell you right now, imposter syndrome is a story that really rarely is helpful. Who knows why we evolved with it? I have no idea, but it is not helpful. Best I can tell. A lot of those things are insecurities. A lot of that stuff is just things we barely even understand about ourselves, okay? So they're not real characteristics about you. And you can't, you just can't let other people tell you who you are anyway. You just can't. You just can't let them tell you who you are. Okay, so I'm depressed. I'm having a hard time passing my prelims or my exams. I'm having a hard time in my research. I can't find a good advisor. I feel like quitting. Well, here's one thing we know. You're definitely not alone in that. That's apparently an empirical regularity. That's actually one of the more common experiences of the graduate student. It's extremely common. And this advisor-advisee thing is a two-sided matching problem with considerable search costs and a limited set of possibilities. That also isn't your fault, okay? There's a lot, so be curious, have fortitude. It will end. If you cannot find a way to solve these problems, hold on as tight as you can and just find a supportive network. Okay? So try to find a healthy community in the meantime. Consider getting a therapist, consider getting a life coach, exercise, diet, sleep. All these things are the things you can control. You have to remember there are things you cannot control, right? And I know because we're social scientists, we think in terms of policy and reprogramming society, right? And I think sometimes that's a trap for us because in our own personal lives, that's not really the job we're in. In our own personal lives, oftentimes we're price takers. So we have to figure out what things we can control and the things we cannot control. Exercise, diet, sleep, life coach, tapping into the things that you love, those things you can control. Do those things that you can control, okay? Focus outward in love, citizenship, and service towards others. So I found reading Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl survived Auschwitz. He did so by apparently believing in radical compassion. And my thought was, I feel like I'm in Auschwitz. I'm obviously not. But if mine is, if my personal life at this time is really considerably better than a person in a death camp, and this worked for them, then I am completely willing to do it. So the thing that I have decided how I handle the pain of this existence and the pain of navigating a career is to be the thing in the profession that I think needs to be there. That's just what I've decided. I've decided that maybe I am the invisible hand. So if there's a thing that I see missing, what I'm trying to do now is to be that thing. Not for a gimmick, but because I do believe the answer oftentimes is in living a life of compassion and service for others. So I have this cost-benefit kind of analysis in my head. It's just a story. All it is a story. It's just a model that I have in my head, and I call it inspired action. And so what I have decided is my son, he attempted suicide. He has schizophrenia. It was just extremely agonizing. He spent 2.5 years in a mental hospital. It just traumatized me. I blamed myself for the suicide and all these things. And I made this decision, which was, well, what I'll do then, and I don't know if this will work, but I'll have to do it first, and then I'll see if it works. I will create things that are valued at $1 more by society than the pain of what I went through. That was my reasoning. So this is obviously the way an economist thinks, an economist who goes through trauma. So I was like, if I can create something that's socially valuable and its value is at whatever dollar amount, it only has to be $1, and I'm doing it as a self-hacking experiment, and I just have to make it worth $1 more than all that trauma's cost was to me. Let's see if that could be a way of redeeming the whole thing. And that was kind of my decision of how to do it. And so I'm obsessed with these inspired actions. For me, they have brought joy back to my life. They've brought meaning back to the career. They've brought purpose back to the research. I know exactly where I fit in the profession for about 30 more years. I can see it. I can see the way I fit in for another 30 years. It's pretty clear. Wasn't what it was going to be like before. Now I kind of know what it is, and I feel really good about it. So I think that sometimes the response to that kind of pain and misery, sometimes it is to move forward in love and compassion and service towards other people and not asking for anything in return. Not asking anything in return, and learning to love the act of loving, and learning to value the act of finding people beautiful, finding people actually meaningful, looking at each particular encounter with a person and thinking to yourself, this moment is real. This moment is real right now, and enjoying it. So this is just how I have kind of responded to the struggles of mental health struggles, is through creating public goods and service and trying my best to be part of a community, and not always being very successful at it, but trying really hard to be more reliable in a community, to being more loyal in a community, being someone that people can depend upon, knowing that I'll be there when the lights go out for people. So some people respond, they become editors. Some people become department chairs. Some people run centers. That all of these things are roles that you can do. They're all possibilities for you to sort into. But if none of them feel like you actually can be entrepreneurial on these things and create your own deal. Okay? So just because it's in equilibrium, because the non-existence of these roles for you is in equilibrium. Just because it's in equilibrium doesn't mean it's good. That's one of the things econ says. Just because it's in equilibrium doesn't mean it was optimal. All right? So you want to allocate your time. If you do go this route, you want to allocate your time, in my opinion, where the returns on that time, socially, the impact that you could have socially in terms of creating that value is large, which means oftentimes, for me anyway, it's a mixture of my talent and being in areas where there aren't a lot of people. Paying attention to the spots that are missing, the soft spots in the market, and having the courage and the bravery to go into those things and do those things so long as the benefits outweigh the cost, and using everything I know about being an intelligent person to try to figure out how a way to do that successfully. I try to do things that are entrepreneurial and fun. So the things that I've done in economics is I started a 5K called the AEA 5K, and I organize it every year. And it's not meant to be mental health. It's not meant to be anything. All it is meant to be is an opportunity for a group of people that are probably feeling, my guess is they feel lonely. My guess is a lot of people feel lonely. It is an opportunity for us to know and be known, love and be loved, having fun, just doing it, making the t-shirts. They let me make the t-shirts, you know? Coachella, this thing I did last summer, just this big workshop I did, you know, I just wanted to do it, you know? And you know, sometimes people don't come to my stuff, and then sometimes they do. And so, you know, my Substack and my podcast invest. So the other thing too, one thing that I also believe though, I'm a big believer in this. All these things, if you can be practical about your career and pragmatic about your career and make these things service your larger goals, it's win-win, and it doesn't take you out of your career. So I do my Substack and my podcast as a way of doing therapeutic writing and stuff like that. But I'm also investing in my human capital, which helps me then rewrite the mixtape in the next edition that comes. I do my mixtape sessions, my platform. That's just my hobby that I've just been trying to use. But at the same time, I see it as my chance to go and help people at scale that I feel like I can do. So all that to say, try to be the person that goes first. I think that's something that I kind of realized a long time ago. I would do these small groups with people where we would share and stuff. And the success of any of these small groups or the success of any community really depends upon one person going first. One person has to go first. They have to be the vulnerable one. They have to be the one that takes the risks. They have to be the one that shares. They have to be the one that loves. They have to be the one that lets in. Even though every other time they've done it, they've gotten hurt, they have to still do it again. And I would just say to you that there is an argument to be made for going first, and someone has to go first. And maybe that's your comparative advantage, you know? So make realistic, ambitious, and virtuous goals for your career. I think this is really important. Write down the 1-year plan, the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan. Where do you want to be next year? What are your goals? Why do you want to be there? What are your values? What steps are necessary to reach that goal? Planning. Do this with your career. Scrutinize what those values are. Don't judge them, but just figure out what they are. That's the part that Becker and Stigler, I think, were right about. As you ladder down deep, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of core things. Okay? There's a lot of core things. Figure out what those values are. Why do you do what you do? Maybe you do what you do because you want a lake house, and maybe you do what you do because you love learning, right? All of those things are perfectly fine. But figure out what they are and make those goals. But make them realistic. Social media. So I heard that tweets can increase my academic success. Is this true? There's actually been several RCTs about this, and the results are kind of mixed. One study finds 3 additional sites 1 year later. Blog mentions on large platforms cause extremely large increases in abstract views. No change in PDF downloads. Maggio et al. Finds a small positive effect on page views, no effect on downloads. Some of this stuff doesn't really matter. Feels like it matters. It's not clear what effect it's really doing. So probably some inequality here as to who gets, who is getting tweeted about. But here's the thing I would just try to say. You can't control all that stuff. And so you have to not care about it. So you can't, so what can you do? You can do your best work. You can do your best work as you are right now, do your best work. Continue to remind yourself why you got into this. Remember what's important in your life, meaning, happiness, intellectual hedonism, relationships, okay? Consider if you're gonna do social media stuff, then maybe what you do is you just promote other people's work. That's what you do. You just promote. Be the person that is missing. If you feel like nobody ever promotes you, promote them. Promote other people, right? Just do it. And then just trust that this will all work out. That's who you want to be anyway, at the end of the day. Every time I get on social media, I get stressed out. Do I need to be on it? No, you do not. You shouldn't do things that make you stressed out, unless they are essential to your goals, and in which case you got to solve it. So I have friends who are very successful, do not use social media at all. They find it too toxic an environment or just not a good fit. They maybe don't think it's toxic. They just don't like it. Considerable self-selection, vocal support for some social media by some people who are speaking about their preferences. That does not generalize to you. You should not take it to mean that it has to be something you do. At the same time, if the reason you are not doing something is because of anxiety, it is a good skill to figure out how to tolerate distress. Okay? So it is a good experience. It is a good thing to figure out how to handle those emotions. So if there is value, if you have convinced yourself that it is a valuable, necessary step to do this kind of thing, but it makes you unhappy, that might be something you talk to somebody about. Okay? But don't be afraid. Some people are on there, they found a community. Maybe that's not where yours is. Ultimately, though, your happiness is the most important thing. I actually have gotten off social media, which was a hard decision because it has been very helpful for my career, but it was making me very unhappy. So, trying to remember the definition of success. So, research and tenure. I have just a couple more things. So, research and tenure, I just wanted to kind of put out here just a couple of thoughts on getting tenure. Every department is different. That's one thing you have to remember. What you learn in one department, what someone tells you about getting tenure in their department with them is N of 1 that may not generalize to you. Okay, so it's just something for you just to kind of remember. So when you get to your department, all right, when you get to your department, one of the most important things you can do is be that social scientist, unusually curious. Be an unusually attentive, curious person, and almost bordering on an anthropologist. Try to figure out why they do all the stuff they do. Why does that one person sit there? Why do they always do this? Why is their door open? Why are they closed? Just listen and observe. Because part of it is that what's actually going on in your tenure department is it's like Mission Impossible, where it's one of those things where the tunnel you have to move through has about 50 laser beams shooting, and you just got to figure out where they are. You don't run through those rooms. You have to wait. You have to figure out where every laser beam is. And once you know where every laser beam is, then you got to figure out how to contort your body to move through those laser beams. Okay? So, talk to faculty, go to lunches, get to know your colleagues, be curious, not judgmental towards your department, listen, learn. Most of us are price takers inside your department. There's a bunch of invisible rivers and traps. Find them, be careful, okay? In economics, it's different in every field, but there's an equivalent of what this is in your field, okay? In economics, you get tenure essentially, you might say 6 articles in 6 years, okay? And everybody, depending on the department, it's where those articles are published. So you could get tenure at MIT with 6 articles in 6 years. They basically have to be Nobel Prize winning work. Everyone has to agree that you're the greatest thing that's ever lived. And each of these 6 papers are in the top journal in the field. Okay, at Baylor, you had to have a pulse to get. So it's a little bit different. So 6 articles in 6 years. Every journal's different. Top 5s, top journals in your field are worth a lot. Trying to learn early about what it means to publish in certain areas and how there is apparently a menu of prices that everyone in the profession knows and that you don't know about each of those publications. You may not like it. You have got to get your hands on that menu. And it may not be the same menu. And I almost guarantee this, it is not the same menu that is being used in your department. So there's this phrase that my advisor told me, and I'm going to say it with a caveat, which is you need to figure out your own preferences. Okay? You need to figure out what you want. And the phrase is, get tenure on the market, not in your department. And what that means is, at Baylor, what it meant was, if I got tenure on the market, I was getting tenure in Baylor. There's no problem there. Tenure on the market means Jason Fletcher gives me tenure in our friendship group, Jason Fletcher gives up and says about me that he believes the work that I'm doing is good. Al Roth says the work that I'm doing is good. That's what you're trying to do. You can find, here's what can easily happen in a department. You can get in a department that has very low standards for tenure and try to basically do the bare minimum and not get, you can try to hit these things on their little bean counting stuff to get tenure and still not get it, and definitely not get a second job. Definitely not get a second job. So you've got to I think it's good to try to say this journal, these sets of journals, to get into these sets of journals is to do a quality of work that is well beyond what I'm capable of right now, is only going to force you to work harder. Okay? It's only going to force you to think harder, collect different data, collect more data, learn more skills, ask harder questions. Okay? So getting tenure on the market, I would like to put that out there, that one of the things that happens when you get tenure on the market is you get tenure in your department and your outside options improve. And it's all about having options, to be honest, because our employers are monopolists. So networking, really, really important. The people in your network are going to write you letters. Going to conferences, very, very important. Going to conferences and presenting, becoming a good presenter. Getting on panels, organizing things, all right? Be brave, be socially appropriate, be the person. I'll tell you this one thing I didn't know. Here's one thing. There is, at the conferences, usually a person who's really good at organizing the dinner. That person is providing a public good. It solves a coordination problem. Maybe you're that person, okay? You be that person, you organize the dinner, you invite people to it, you all go to dinner, you all talk and you have drinks and you have fun and you make a friend, right? Do that constantly. Go to as many conferences as you can. Present constantly at the conferences, all right? Swing for the fences. Absolutely. The thing is about this 6 articles in 6 years, you have to write more than 6 articles in 6 years to get 6 publications in economics. You have to write like 20. I mean, you have to have like a huge portfolio. Tons of them are failures. Tons of them never get published. Some stuff just languishes. So this thing here about 6 articles in 6 years, a lot of it is juggling a portfolio. This idea of the portfolio in finance, holding a portfolio where the portfolio is the stock as opposed to each individual. What it means to hold a portfolio is that you have inside the portfolio, you have some stuff that's really risky and some stuff that's like boringly safe. But all the risks kind of balance each other out, and then in expectation, you make 10% a year. It's kind of like that, right? It's kind of like that in the career that you got to have. You're going to have to think in a portfolio mindset in order to beat the odds. And then at that point, there's a lot of this that's mathematical. A lot of this is mathematical, okay? So you get tenure based on three things at many universities. You get tenure based on research, and nothing replaces it. Nothing replaces it. Doesn't matter what they tell you. Nothing will ever, no amount of any other thing you do the rest of your time has an exchange rate with publications. Okay? So research, teaching depends on the school. Some schools, if you're a good teacher, you're practically punished for it. Okay? Some schools like Baylor, it's really, really important. So teaching depends on the school, and then collegiality. Well, collegiality is the fudge factor. That's how people get around denying you tenure. And there's lots of ways for people to deny you tenure based on what appears to be absolutely unfair type things. But the thing to kind of remember, as my mom says, if they deny you tenure, well, they weren't your friends anyway. You know, why do you want to be with somebody that doesn't want to be with you? Seriously, Hito Embens, that won the Nobel Prize back in October, he was denied tenure at Harvard with his Nobel Prize winning work. I asked him on the podcast, I was like, well, he was like, well, they don't get to tell me who I am. And I was excited to go to California after that. You can choose to think that way. That's what I liked about hearing that. There's lots of options that you have in responding to a tenure denial or disappointment in your career. It's entirely legitimate for you to find a story that makes it that it actually was a gift all along. Okay? So here's my hack though on getting tenure. If you have to do all three, because here's the problem. You can spend if you're judged on those three things, you can spend all your time on just one of them and not have enough on that one, let alone all three. So what you have to do, in my opinion, is try to find ways to force these things to become complementarities. Writing grants that fuel research, okay? Co-authoring with other faculty. That's a collegiality. That's a vote right there, okay? Teaching classes on topics that you need to learn. That's exactly how I got causal inference. I knew I needed to learn this stuff, so I basically said, I gotta learn this class. I didn't know what any of it was. There was no such thing as causal inference. There were no books. So I just was like, I'll put it together, and it was just completely crazy that first year. So, that's how I work though. That's kind of my style to do that kind of thing. So think of it as like this. You have to fix the car and you need to spend time with your kid. If you're fixing the car, you're not spending time with your kid. If you're spending time with your kid, you're not fixing the car. Solution, ask your kid to sit there while you fix the car, right? That's the metaphor of what you have to do. Anything that you can bundle, what it means is that effort spent on one is producing externalities on the other thing. So as much as you can take that scarce time and figure out a way to bundle these things, effort in one dimension actually is helping all of them. And there's all kinds of hacks like that you have to work on. So mental health, I know this was kind of a rambling talk, but there's a lot we don't know, I think, about the determinants of mental health. When my son, we were in and out of mental hospitals, one of the psychiatrist told me, he said, we're just a generation away from using leeches for treating mental health. He was kind of kidding, but he was basically saying, I think there's a lot of overconfidence in the field about what exactly causes and cures these mental health problems. And I don't think sometimes the area of mental health is nearly as developed as people think it is. That's just my personal opinion. So being a PhD student, being a junior faculty, intensely stressful experiences for some people. For some people, it's pure joy. For some people, they just hit the ground running. They got out, they got those 6 publications really quick, and they had a great experience. For me, it was like riding my bicycle right onto the beach and hitting a block of sand and just flew right off the bike. So when it is stressful for some people, it is stressful in spades, and people can experience extreme amounts of mental health deterioration, all right? Departments are gonna need a leader to really take this on. It will be unrewarded. It will not help. You will have to fight political fights, okay? You will have to build alliances, navigate obstacles, find resources, put yourself in harm's way. There's all kinds of obstacles associated with it, okay? It's going to need top-down support by chairs. It's going to need it's going to need support by colleagues. It is not rewarded. And there's all kinds of selection on dependent variable issues that are likely causing some misinformation. And yet, probably there is no other way to address the problems that are very unique to the graduate student and unique to the junior faculty, right? So collecting data through shared stories and surveys seems like a kind of anticlimactic conclusion, but I think that it is a start. I think that it is a start. Yes.
Okay, I just had two things on this slide as I was thinking through your entire talk. In terms of talking about specifically like thinking about that like advisor-advisee relationship and how important that is, and then thinking again about like departments and this whole like understanding of mental health. I think one thing that I've noticed, again, this is my own personal experience, is this lack of mentorship training, mentee and mentorship training as part of the Ph.D. program.
Yeah.
And something that I feel like is like super lacking, just like as a wide spectrum of issues. But like as a PhD student who's about to hopefully enter candidacy, I never was trained on how to be a mentor.
Yeah.
If I was to want to step into this, next level career role.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that it's similar at other schools and
Right.
departments. And so just thinking about that and how there's this like lack of like how to be a leader, how to be a mentor, and how to be a good mentee to somebody else. And so one thing that I did on my own was take this like external class that's offered through Wood Science that is about like research mentor training, and it's learning about mentee and mentor relationships. But again, like this is not a widespread thing. This is not something that's like just commonplace as part of the program. So one thing that came to me as I was taking this class was like, oh wow, this is something that like everybody should use
Yep.
and benefit from. And so as you're talking about this like leader and undertake research and training, I feel like having this as part of the PhD experience would be super beneficial.
Totally.
And the one other thing I was going to say was speaking about my own experiences again of like trying to find these resources within the university. The ombudsman's office is something that again I don't know if it's a tapped in resource at other schools, in other students from other departments, but that's like a confidential service that UW offers, and I think it's supposed to be for employees and not for students. But as a student, I've gone to them before, and they've been very like open arms to students.
Yeah.
And they've actually talked to me about how departments have come to them about these kinds of issues, thinking about mental health in their department and trying to build this culture of like more conversation between professors, like faculty members in the department and students in the department, and like them having these issues about, related to mental health, and just thinking about how that could be a super, again, an untapped resource.
Yep.
These external people that might not be within the department because of fear of repercussion and fear of these other things that could be going on. So anyway, that is my perspective.
That's really great. So I was told that too. This is all really new to me, knowing what resources actually already are there where you could get training to be a mentor, or tapping into the local university might have those resources. I mean, I think that the thing I keep thinking is no one should be inventing the wheel, but that this probably is going to require human capital. Ava.
To add a little bit to this conversation too, a lot of these relationships and what we're dealing with depend on expectations. So either met expectations or failed expectations in some way. So as a student, what are you expecting to get out of your graduate school experience? And when you don't get what you're expecting, you're feeling like, oh, something is going wrong here, right? And, or, and vice versa. If you're a mentor working with a student, you have certain expectations, and you may feel disappointed if the student doesn't return that. And I've heard conversations take place about, well, you should lay out your expectations with your advisor or your mentee. But I also think that there should be some not just from one person, their advisor, but overall, and where they can get that. And, you know, the reverse can be true. And I think that goes to things like being able to write a paper. I mean, I came in with that experience. Other students have not. And I'll see somebody say, wow, Ava, you know, you're really good at writing. Like, but I learned that from somebody.
Right.
And, you know, other students really need to get that opportunity too, you know, to learn it. And so is that something they should expect from graduate school, or should they be coming in knowing how to write a research paper? You know, probably not. I mean, a research paper is a very structured document and very specific to a field.
Right.
Thinking about what are very specific things that every graduate student should know or should get out of their experience, and how can they get that? And it doesn't have to be from one person, because I do think that a lot is expected of individual faculty members who are already strained for time, you know, from, you know, service obligations to research to teaching, and it's thinking about that whole system.
Yeah.
And managing those expectations, because when expectations aren't met, people feel disappointed, and they, you know, start to have resentment or these other feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was curious, when you had this market model that
Yeah.
you about mentors and market for mentorship and coaching, I thought it was very interesting. You're probably familiar with the National Center for Faculty and Diversity Development.
Yeah.
And so you had something that's just been incredibly successful, but it's also fairly expensive. I'm just curious what you thought about that model.
You know, this is like a real new thing that's just been kind of growing inside me for the last 6 months. I went through Miles Kimball's pods. I've been thinking about the fact that I want to help. So I was actually looking at becoming a life coach, and maybe there, but then I'm still kind of, I don't know about the model. I don't know all that's out there. Someone else told me about that, and it's on my list to look into it more, to learn more, but I don't know much about. What do you know about the model?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I would just say to the students, one thing that people have done fairly successfully, depending on is because it's kind of expensive, but also has an incredible success rate at helping people develop better work-life balance and still achieve their writing and publishing goals. It's basically an approach to enjoy life as an academic and not let it take over your life in a super stressful way. Right? And so I think one thing I'd mention is some people have been successful at asking for funding from their institution as part of their job offer package, like as part of the negotiation package, which is, so in addition to this research budget you've given me, I also want X thousand dollars a year to participate in the MCFD programs.
Right.
Anyway, it's a successful bargaining tool that people have done. But I don't know the sense of how you could scale that in a way that didn't require a lot of money, because
Yeah.
it requires a ton of investment.
Yeah.
In this coaching process, and outside of that, it's like academic coaches who have to find one-on-one and
Yep.
pay for, and it's very expensive, and you have to have research money to do it.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the thing is that makes it seem like it's not functional is where you see, because oftentimes life coaching is not covered by insurance, you know, so it's paid at, you know, hourly rates, $100, $500 an hour. These are marketing to executives who have very high willingness to pay. The groups of people right now that need this kind of academic coaching have low willingness to pay, because low ability to pay. These are graduate students. And so, junior faculty too, because it wouldn't probably come out of research money. So, I mean, I don't know how you would scale up it exactly, except that maybe, I'm not really sure. You know, the one-on-one model part of it doesn't seem like it would, it's not clear that it would it feels like that's not the solution, that you're asking the end user to pay for it. But for it to really start making, and not, but the thing is, if you're wanting people to sort into this side thing, moonlighting with academic coaching, they would have to be compensated for their time. So, I mean, I don't really, I just keep thinking that probably the thing I keep going back to is that I think that people are wanting to talk with more people about coaching. They're wanting to get more coaching. It doesn't have to be a permanent relationship, but they're wanting to talk to someone about a lot of the non-cognitive skill elements of success. And they may find that their local pool of mentors are not they don't feel right. It's like if you only could draw your therapist from the people that live on your block, right? Then it would be the probability that it would be a good fit just seems like zero, So you could imagine some people in some departments getting kind of stuck. Yeah.
Jenna, what was the name of that?
It's the NCFDD, or facultydiversity.org. It was originally designed to support scholars of color, and by scholars of color, supporting scholars of color, and it's now grown into something huge. And I think scrolling through the pages that there's also graduate student programs.
But you said it's really expensive?
Well, I don't know about the graduate student programs. I know that for the faculty, participation in like a 6-month program or a year-long program is several $1,000s.
And it's
Yeah. But there's even like 6-week writing programs in the summer that I think are much less expensive that people have had great success with.
huh. You've talked to people that have been through it?
Yeah, so several people here at Wisconsin have done this as part of their walk toward tenure, and they were their resources from Wisconsin to help pay for it. And then now those people's students have been successful at getting this as part of their offer package at other institutions.
Oh, wow. Okay. I will look into that more. Thanks. Jason.
I have a reinventing the wheel question.
Yeah.
What do you think, or have you given any thought, or this is really to open to anybody, we talked all day yesterday about counterfactuals and everything, like alternative worlds. You take people who are in Ph.D. programs and think what other jobs they might have, and whether their mental health would be improved by
Right.
those places. So going back to this reinventing the wheel question, like a bunch of 22 to 30-year-olds have other jobs,
Right.
and your general population measures of mental health were better. Is there anything to learn, do you think, from these other jobs, or there's any mechanism, thoughts that come up with the better mental health on average with these other jobs?
Oh.
That's one question. And then I wonder, kind of a similar question is, what types of jobs might we think are most similar to the graduate student experience? And because as you get closer and closer, those other jobs might be doing things that universities could too. This is reinventing the wheel question. Or everything's so specific to
Right.
graduate student experience that it really has to be a completely new wheel. So that's the genre of question I have.
Right. I mean, one thing that's different, I don't know if this is, but the 19 to 29-year-olds that are in the general population are making probably higher salaries, and they have in their mind less uncertainty about their future career, because there might not be nearly this high stakes moment of graduation with the placement the way that there is in graduate school. I don't know what that ends up doing, but that's one thing that's different. I think that in graduate school, for many people, it is really, really, really difficult. The work is really difficult in a way that I don't remember my work before graduate school being difficult in that way. for me, I felt like I could literally never sleep and not make an inch progress on certain things, And so I think that kind of pushing a boulder up a hill feeling, isn't general. What I don't know is if that's the one that actually seems to be, to me anyway, I don't see how you somehow make that one less difficult. I don't see how you make learning these difficult papers less difficult, writing these papers less difficult. That they're just hard. To me, they're hard. They always are hard. So I don't know, like, it's almost like the counterfactual for graduate school is something that is of equivalent, profoundly taxing mental strain, a feeling of inadequacy that you're going to experience any light. I guess I had a particularly negative experience. Mine was pretty hard. I'd never had any calculus hardly before I even started grad school, so it was just brutal. But so it's like I wonder sometimes a little bit, like, the counterfactual is something that's just really, really intensely difficult, And so what would that be? I'm not really sure. I don't know. I mean, I'm not good at coming up with the solutions at all. I mean, I think that the things that I do to keep going are largely driven by refusing to give up. So, I have that kind of like refusing to quit kind of thing. And so, well, if you refuse to quit, but literally your body has given out, then you come up with all kinds of weird hacks to make yourself keep going. And so I just always tried to figure out what my body and brain needed to keep going, And so, but I just got really lucky. I mean, I got really, really lucky with my advisor. If I've heard war stories about poor matches with advisors, I just can't even imagine. I wouldn't have lasted a day like that.
Sorry, I was going to speak to that question again, and I'm sorry, I feel like I've been talking a lot today, so feel free to cut me out. I think I've just thought a lot about these questions, and this is like I'm also a population health PhD student, so this is like part of my wheelhouse as well. So I think one other thing in terms of thinking about the counterfactual, and again, this is from my own personal experience, but thinking about like coming to grad school straight out of undergrad versus coming to graduate school having had work experience.
Yeah.
This is not me saying that like you should be forcing people to have work experience in order to come to graduate school, but I wonder if you look at differences by people who did take time to go into a career or go into like a job that they then found like unsatisfactory or kind of just unsatisfying, I guess. And thinking about like, they had then this passion to like pursue this question or like the pursuit of knowledge and what undergraduate school, right? And I guess the question here is like, is the counterfactual also like, maybe they're not just unhappy with like their current life or whatever, but when you go straight from undergrad, you don't have any differential in terms of, it's a differential to like, that go to graduate school, which is part of an undergrad, but you don't even have like a differential of like, well, I worked for the state health department and it was like the most boring thing I've ever done in my entire life, and then I went to graduate school and there was this huge, change in my thinking, and I had a lot more opportunity to explore these questions that I was interested in. And so again, I'm just wondering if like you would see a difference if you looked at people that went straight from undergrad into graduate school in terms of like differences in mental health than people who had work experience because of their satisfaction.
Yeah. I do think it's a different. It does seem like it's different when you decide to go to graduate school because you're like, I've tried this other thing and I definitely want this. It's almost like that slide I did earlier where, you go to graduate school because you know what life is like and you don't like it, right? And I think like that was probably, I was a mixture of that and thinking being an economist would be really wonderful. But I think that you also meet people who I think probably just kind of are on like an uninterrupted train, you know, like from the point of graduating into graduate school. And, but everybody, the thing is like, there just doesn't seem to be any one particular, success story. Everybody it seems like it's just like local shocks happen, positive or negative, inside the graduate program regularly. And, sometimes it just is a huge shock. Sometimes they're small. Sometimes it's a huge win. I mean, it's like in economics, the stories oftentimes are two students, same, they both get into the program. One of them might even on paper have been the one that was the far more impressive. And both of them come up with great ideas. And one of them, every single time, they are unable to get the data. They are unable to get the data. Like they get all the way down and they go, and then they get to the very end and it just goes away. Well, a lot of that is random, but it's really costly because it can set you back years. And so trying to figure out, a human can only handle that so many times before they start to believe something's wrong with them. And I have this student that I knew and it was just, you could just see it forming in their mind. There's something wrong with them. Or no, it wasn't even that they would say something's wrong with me. They started to say, I just don't like research. And you were like, well, nobody would like research if literally you spend 8 months on this project and some random person shuts down the entire project and will not give you the data after you've spent all this time, whereas your colleague spent half that time and met up with it and got the data and it was not a problem. Like it would be, no one would like that because you're doing all the stuff that's horrible. So some of these things like, in those kinds of things, I mean, those are like, those kinds of things are almost like exogenous shocks. I don't know how you can't insure against it. There's not like an insurance market you can purchase into where, in the event that I don't get my data, then you'll pay me back. It's like, you don't get the data, you don't get the data. And so that can cause major hardships on a person.
I'm wondering though about, I don't know how it is specifically in economics, but hopefully, if that happens to students, you start thinking about, well, what's the research team who's advising them? Are they helping them overcome these challenges, or at least helping them anticipate this particular obstacle if they know that others have encountered it? I think that's a part of the role of having someone who's junior and not understanding the system.
Right.
Is that's I think a part of the hidden curriculum.
Right.
Is understanding how to navigate these things that you can't look up in a paper. You can't
Right.
necessarily teach yourself without having gone through it, but then that mistake is very costly.
Yeah. Well, that also kind of gets back to this thought that I keep having, which is that I don't think the current generation of faculty in econ anyway have gotten explicit training in the hidden curriculum themselves. So they don't know. So you were saying, hopefully that person is being advised in such a way that they're preparing for it. I don't know if that's true at all. I think that I actually don't know what's being done. What you tell students is, we have a PhD program, but the 2 students that I've had used data that I got, so I've never actually watched people flounder. But I'm not, I don't know exactly Jason can speak to it more generally than me about what is it that makes a successful mentor is almost itself a question that probably needs, a lot more elaboration because I don't know what it is personally. You don't know?
I think both stories have a similar alternative framing about just recognizing number of events that you're talking about that either decide your success or not, or whether you're a good mentor or not, are so small. Like the student, this fictional student you're talking about with the 8 months, how many projects will that student have before they graduate?
Yeah, exactly.
If the number's 5, and you get unlucky by 1 or 2.
Right.
That's really different than getting lucky on 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Same thing with a mentor. You could have 2 outstanding
Yeah.
students and have done nothing, and everything looks good. Or
Right.
the other direction. So you brought this up before about thin markets and people only get married a small number of times, only have this a few number of times. Kind of same thing with early careers.
Right.
You know, you have a small number, and this is also tied into your portfolio discussion, is that one way that you smooth that risk over time is to build up more projects. But as an early scholar, you still have 3 or 4 or
Right.
5. And something going bad with one is disproportionate to that.
Yep. 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 Yeah, it does feel, yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel like in my world it looks like it's very laissez-faire. It's sort of like, you know, you need a particular faculty member to just kind of have a vision of what type of mentor they're going to be, and that kind of shapes a lot of it, you know. And but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah,